So the OLLI program at UNC Asheville, their mission is to promote opportunities to thrive in life's second half through programs in lifelong learning, leadership, community service, and research. OLLI also regularly offers free programming such as this one, which is available to the community through its partnerships with organizations. Rebecca mentioned the class on the science of climate change. We also teach a class here at OLLI that'll be offered in the spring. It's called The Science and Impacts of Climate Change with instructors from my institute and from the NOAA Data Center. Registration for the spring term opens on Monday, February 12th. I don't get paid to teach that class, so it's not an advertisement. You can get information at olliasheville.unca.edu. So please check that out. I'm sure many of you are part of that program, and thanks to everyone for coming. So why are we here? Why are we here in Asheville? Why are we here tonight? This is partly a follow-on to the class we did at the Arboretum last fall. We wanted to do a town hall and the timing was not great. And then we realized we had kind of a happy coincidence in timing. So most of what I do is working at something called the Technical Support Institute for the National Climate Assessment, which is a federally mandated report on climate change. That's the website, and please check it out. You'll hear more about that in just a minute. There's a team of about 15 of us, mostly NC State employees, but also federal employees at the NOAA Data Center, and contractors who support the National Climate Assessment process. This assessment came out just last November. We work very closely with the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which is kind of a working group of 15 now federal agencies based in DC that leads the National Climate Assessment and related activities. So we work very closely with them, and about 15 of them are in town this week. We've just completed 3 days of long but very productive meetings, looking back at what we did and planning for the future. So raise your hand if you're from USGCRP, from DC and elsewhere around the country. Thanks to all for coming here. We realized this would be a great opportunity to have Allison Crimmins, the Director of the National Climate Assessment, speak to you about the report and some of its implications. And we also did a really amazing art program with this. And so Allyza Lustig, who is also from USGCRP, will speak to you. Allison can introduce her a little bit more. As you probably saw in the program, Allison's going to give us sort of a keynote speech, and then Allyza will talk about the artwork, and I think you'll really enjoy that. We'll take a break. We really want this to be a conversation in the second half. Deke Arndt, who's in the back, is the director of NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, will be our MC, and we'll introduce, or probably have the panelists introduce themselves. But we want to take questions from the audience. We'll bring a microphone out. You can get up and ask a question. We do have note cards kind of at either front table if you'd prefer to take the quiet method and write them down, but we'd encourage you to engage. And then we've got a bunch of people on Zoom, and so you can put questions in the chat, and my colleague Laura, I think, is monitoring that. We'll either read them out or she can answer some of them, and we'll try to make it a really engaging conversation. We hope you enjoy it. So the next order of business is to introduce Allison Crimmins. As I mentioned, she's the Director of the National Climate Assessment. Our team here first worked with her several years ago when she, in a role at the Environmental Protection Agency, led a USGCRP report specifically on the health impacts of climate change. And then she went on to other things. We stayed in touch. In 2020 and early 21, things got a little weird with the federally mandated National Climate Assessment. One of the happier days in my professional life was when we found out that Allison was going to take on the role of directing that report. And she's done an amazing job delivering it in a short period of time with some pretty bold vision. And she can tell you about some of that. And it's really a pleasure to have her here. She's one of my favorite people, and I hope you'll enjoy what she has to say. So without further ado, Allison, you're somewhere out there, I hope. There, hanging out with her husband, Greg, who's traveled all the way down to hang out with us too. So.
Okay. I was told to talk closer to the mic, so I'm going to try to do that. Thank you for having me. I love Asheville, so I'm very happy to be here. It's closer still. Okay. Maybe if I talk really loud. All right. So I'm here to tell you about the 5th National Climate Assessment, which is the U.S. government's preeminent report on climate change, and specifically on climate change impacts, risks, and responses. And as Tom noted, this is a report that's mandated by Congress. It's part of the Global Change Research Act of 1990. And so we are on the 5th edition of the assessment, which again, as Tom noted, just came out in November after a lot of hard work. This is an assessment that was written by 500 authors and 260 technical contributors from every state in the nation, and Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, Palau. So really, really great author representation and just the top scientists from all around the country participating in this effort. I have to take a note to mention the technical support unit here in Asheville. So this report is really designed to be very readable and accessible. It's not scientific jargon. And a big reason for that is because the technical support unit helps those 500 scientists write in English. And they also make our website and our figures and our PDFs and many of the products that make the report accessible and readable and beautiful. So huge thanks to our Asheville friends here. The report has 32 different chapters, so there's a little something for everyone in here. We have chapters on physical science. We have chapters that look at a topic like energy, agriculture, health, indigenous communities, transportation, built environment, those kind of sectoral kind of topics across the entire US. And then we have 10 regional chapters where we can zoom in a little bit more on a specific geography in the US. And I'll tell you some of the major takeaways from the report and then a few from the Southeast chapter. We also have a chapter on mitigation and adaptation. So again, whatever you're looking for, hopefully it is somewhere in this report. But I want to note that it is not just a big report. It's really not meant to be a big dusty tome that's gathering dust on a shelf somewhere. It's really designed to be useful and usable. We want people to think of this as their guide to climate change in the United States. And so we put a lot of effort into making it useful and usable. We make sure that language is accessible to people. We make sure the website's easy to use, that it works on tablets and phones, that it's accessible to people who use screen readers. We've created podcasts and an online audiobook for people who want to interact with it that way. You're going to hear an amazing presentation about the art later, so I won't steal that thunder. And we also created something called the NCA Atlas, which is a mapping tool, and it lets you go into this this online interactive tool and select the climate variable of your interest and the future warming of your interest, and then zoom really far into your own state or county so that you can get really specific information about your geography. And the technical support unit here helped us to develop 400 figures that are in the report. But if by chance one of those 400 figures is not the exact figure you're looking for, you can go to this atlas and create it yourself and download that. So that's a little bit about the report itself. I thought I would give you just a quick sampling of some of the major takeaways and then some of the findings from the Southeast chapter that I think are pretty relevant to this area. The first thing that I'll mention is that this assessment is showing how more and more people all around the country are experiencing climate change right now, right outside their window. It's not something for grandchildren or children. It's something that we are experiencing right now here in the United States. And a lot of people experience climate change through extreme weather events. And this was a sentence that the first time I read it in one of the early drafts, it really it hit me hard. So the sentence is, in the 1980s, this country experienced on average $1 billion extreme event every 4 months. Now we experience one every 3 weeks. So we are seeing more frequent and more severe extreme events. And just last year in 2023, there were $28 billion extreme events. However, it is not all gloom and doom. This is not a gloom and doom report. And one of the things that I think really gave me a lot of courage in this assessment is that this report shows how many communities around the country are already taking action to avoid warming and build resilience. And a lot of that action is happening at state and local levels. So there's a lot of really great case studies in this report showing what communities are already doing. At a national level, we're observing US emissions continuing to fall since they peaked in 2007, all while GDP and population have continued to increase. And that fall in emissions that we've seen so far has mostly come from the reduction in electricity generated from coal. However, we're also seeing a really rapid increase in the capacity for renewable energy technology. And we're seeing the costs of those renewable energy technologies rapidly falling. So we saw a drop of 70% in wind energy costs and 90% in solar energy costs over just the last decade. So really rapid changes, and some of the new legislation that just came out under this administration is expected to further increase deployment of those clean energy technologies. However, we need to be moving much faster, and we need to go much further than we have so far. So we do have an abundance of cost-effective, feasible options to reduce emissions, but we need to implement and deploy those options at a scale we have not ever done before. We also need to be looking at some additional options, both for reducing emissions and for increasing the uptake of carbon. So things like nature-based solution. We also need to be thinking more about transformative adaptations. So the assessment finds that a lot of the adaptation we've been doing so far has been very incremental in nature, but we need to be thinking a little bit bigger about how we're rethinking our systems and our cities and the way we get around and the way we work in a way that makes us more climate ready. The good news is that the assessment finds that a lot of these actions, these mitigation and adaptation actions, have immediate or near-term benefits. So even if we're not seeing some of the climate benefits till the middle of the century or later, we know that there's a lot of immediate benefits, like to air quality, to our health, to jobs, to our ecosystems, and that the benefits of those actions, taking those actions now, far outweigh the costs. So those are some of the big sort of headline takeaways from the report. I thought I would talk a little bit more about the Southeast chapter. And I really encourage you to read this chapter. It's very well written and just full of great figures. And one of the, I encourage you to really read the first paragraph in particular, because it is a really powerful and forthright paragraph. It starts out by describing some of the underlying social and economic conditions in the region, even before we start thinking about climate change. So that first paragraph is talking about historical oppression and racism in the Southeast that have led to a lot of communities of color being more exposed to climate impacts, being more vulnerable to climate impacts, and having less capacity to adapt to climate change impacts. The chapter also notes the change in population expected in Southeast. So an increase in population in urban areas and a population loss in rural areas, and how those changes that we've observed recently are expected to continue in the future. So for efforts, I mentioned the efforts so far to adapt to climate change have been incremental. They've also in the Southeast been concentrated in the wealthier coastal areas and metropolitan areas. So when we're building a more climate ready nation, we need to be thinking about, think about those social trends and then the climate trends on top and interacting with them. And we need to be thinking about how to develop urban space with smart and green infrastructure, while also ensuring that rural communities have equitable access to social and financial investments that allow them to mitigate and adapt to climate change as well. Some of the climate impacts in this area specifically, I will just give you a couple examples. The chapter talks about the increase in extreme heat and how we are expected to see more frequent and more severe heat waves, and how those are going to occur over a longer heat season, longer in the year. And this is, of course, a really huge human health impact. It's particularly important for outdoor workers. This is an area of the country where we expect to see a lot of labor impacts from climate change, so loss in labor hours from outdoor workers, which of course has a lot of economic impacts as well. And I want to also note that during these heat waves in this area, we also have observed a lot of power outages or blackouts. And there's evidence in this chapter that is showing that some of these blackouts, especially ones that are lasting more than an hour, are increasing. And this is something we talk about in terms of cascading or compounding impacts. So you might start with an extreme heat event that in itself has health impacts, economic impacts, but then that heat causes a power outage. Now, on top of that, people can't run their air conditioning. Elevators in buildings are not working. Medical equipment might not be working. Businesses are closed. So there's kind of these cascading impacts that really ripple through social and economic systems. Another example in the Southeast is, and in North Carolina in particular, is wildfire impacts. And I know we talk a lot about wildfire in kind of the Western US, you know, in California and in Alaska and Hawaii, but drought and wildfire is also a really important climate threat here in North Carolina. I'm sure many of you remember that in 2016, there were major wildfires that burned in Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. And to give you another example of that cascading and compounding impact, during those wildfires in 2016, there were again power outages. And there was also damage to the pipelines that supplied water to the sprinkler systems that led to a lack of water to fight those fires. So that resulted in a lot more damages than the fire would have just on its own. So that's a kind of another example of cascading or compounding impacts. I'm going to leave you with a positive note, though. As I said, it's not all doom and gloom. There are a lot of discussions of opportunities in this report. And one of those is opportunities in jobs. And this is not just in the Southeast, but really across the country. We're seeing an increase in jobs in the clean energy field. And under multiple scenarios, the increase in the number of jobs in the clean energy field will far outweigh the number of jobs lost in the fossil fuel industry. Now, of course, those are numbers, they're not people. So as we're thinking about this transition, we need to be thinking about how to make it just. There's already issues in the energy industry that leave out Black communities and women in the energy industry. So we need to be thinking about, as we're transitioning, how are we addressing some of those existing social inequities and not creating new ones. So I will stop there. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Allyza. Do you want me to introduce her? Okay, great. So I hope that's given you a little flavor of the report. I really encourage you to dig into it more and look at some of our resources. One of the things that I think we're all really, really excited about is something new for the assessment, which is this art project. And Allyza Lustig is a senior manager at the U.S. Global Change Research Program and absolutely key to the champion of this project. So if she tells you that it was me, it wasn't, it was her. Don't believe her. She's really, really amazing, and I'm so glad you get to hear from her today.
Let's see here. Good? Okay. Okay. Could I try to use one of these mics instead? Great, thank you. Okay. Hello, my name is Allyza Lustig. I am, as Allison said, a manager on the National Climate Assessment Team with the U.S. Global Change Research Program. And I am here to talk about one of our new initiatives this time around, which we call Art by Climate. Art by Climate was a project of the 5th National Climate Assessment, and it was the first ever call for visual art to be featured in the report. I put the QR code up to the gallery here, so please take a look at it. That you can peruse during my talk, but definitely afterward as well. It, in my opinion, shows up better on computer screen, but this will at least get you there to start. So before I get too much into what we did, I want to talk about why we took this on. Why did we include a gallery of visual art in the report? The first reason was to increase the reach of the report and in general to bring more people into the climate change conversation. The National Climate Assessment, as Allison mentioned, is a very large report. Sometimes that's intimidating to folks who are not coming to this project from a science background, and by including the arts, we really hope to make this more accessible. Second reason was to increase the resonance of the report, to really highlight the human side of climate change, to engage emotion. Climate change is a human issue in the sense that it was caused by people, it affects people and natural systems, and it's going to be resolved by people. And so we, in including the arts, really elevate that, and we engage in the emotional side of this challenge, which affects people in their everyday lives. Finally, we're trying to demonstrate the power of art to advance the climate change conversation. I say that because in some ways this is sort of a proof of concept. We've never done anything like this before, and we're really trying to demonstrate how the arts do more than perhaps text or figures and data can do alone. A few things to keep in mind, especially for us as a science community, but maybe for folks in the audience as well. Art is not science communication, right? Sometimes as a science community, we're like, ooh, let's use art because it's going to help us better say what we want to say. And in some ways that happens. And in some instances, data and science are actually integrated into the art. And I have several examples of that here. But really, it's important to recognize that art is its own form of observing, of documenting, of interpreting, analyzing, communicating, and imagining the future. And that kind of framing is really important when we're trying to do cross-disciplinary collaboration like this one. Okay, so this project did begin with Allison Crimmins. I demand that it did, or I insist that it did. And she, as you know, is our NCA5 director. She joined our office several years ago and said that she wanted to see more visual art in the National Climate Assessment. That got me thinking because I have an informal arts background and I was really taken with this idea and what it could possibly mean for the report. So Allison and I got together with several colleagues across a number of federal agencies, including FEMA, NSF, Smithsonian, NOAA. I think that was it. And we together brainstormed about what a call for art for the National Climate Assessment could look like. And we came up with two calls, one for youth and one for adults. Youth was for ages 13 to 17 and adults was 18 and up. We put these out in, well, it says right here, the submission deadline was January 2023. We put it out sometime the fall before. So we gave people a decent amount of time to create work or to at least respond. And we didn't know what we would get from this, being that it was the first time we ever did it. Were we going to get like 20 pieces? Were we going to get 20,000 pieces? We really didn't know. In the end, we got over 850 submissions from across the country, which turns out to have been a delightful in-between because we had an incredible range of work that was submitted for this project. You can see a subset of them up here. We have works about wildfire, and we got quite a bit about wildfire. We had works about art, about glaciers and ice. We had pieces about extreme events and air quality, and some thinking about a hopeful future. In general, people seem to be processing. There was a lot of grief that came through in these works, a lot of anxiety, a lot of people kind of grappling with what is happening in this moment. Although, like I said, there were some people kind of thinking about the future and imagining what it could be. In addition to kind of the thematic range, we also had every kind of medium you could possibly imagine, from more traditional sort of painting and drawing to performance art and installation. We had textile and beadwork, really just an incredible range of artwork. So we worked with a jury, a team of evaluators from institutions who have expertise at the art-science intersection, the art-climate intersection. We worked with folks, for example, from the Climate Museum in New York City. We had the director of the Center for the Environment at the Nevada Museum of Art, someone from NSF who ran an arts program in Antarctica for a number of years. And that panel helped us to down select from 850 pieces to a subset of 92 pieces that we are ultimately including in the report. They also helped us to select a set of award winners, 2 adults and 3 youth. The adults are featured up here, and you may have seen them on the postcard table in the back. Everyone take some postcards if you haven't already. This piece right here is by an artist named Tammy West. Tammy is based in Austin, Texas, and you can see that she literally stitched the ground with this piece to talk about the impacts of drought in the southern Great Plains and the American Southwest. This is an extraordinary piece in the sense that it talks both to maybe the futility and sort of her hopelessness in this moment, but also our power to still do something. And I think that juxtaposition really sort of speaks to a lot of the general themes of the National Climate Assessment itself. Next, we have a piece by Simona Klausnitzer. Simona is talking about the impacts of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. I'll get into that a little bit more, but this is a triple layer lino cut, meaning she did 3 different lino cut prints, cut them out and layered them. So fabulous piece by Simona. These are our 3 youth award winners, and these are incredibly talented students. This is Taylin on the left side. She's based out in Idaho and is talking about some of the ecosystems that are most dear to her. The center one is a piece by Amelia, who I think she's based in Ohio, and she's talking about kind of the uncertainty of the future. And I think even if she's not talking about it directly, you can kind of get a sense for some of the perhaps youth mental health impacts of climate change, anxiety, and we actually featured this particular piece in our human health chapter alongside text speaking to those very issues. So we were able to make some really nice pairings of the artwork and of our NCA science. And finally, you have a piece by Ritika. Ritika was at the time an 8th grader, and she did this color pencil drawing that is absolutely fabulous because it really highlights the agency of the moment. She's talking about our ability to make a change. And wonderfully, Ritika was invited to join President Biden when he announced the release of the NCA. She introduced him live, and it was absolutely fabulous. Okay, so in addition to submitting the actual works of art, we asked all artists to also submit an artist statement. And if you go to the gallery, I really encourage you to take a look at these because in many instances, they add a lot of depth to the artworks themselves. So I picked out this one just as an example. This is Simona's piece again, and she's talking about the fact that catastrophic storms are expected to become more severe in the Caribbean region. She talks about the ways you might interpret this piece, saying that you could see it as the storm itself, the infrastructural impacts, and the human impacts, but you could also interpret it symbolically, watching ourselves twist in a storm of inequity that caused Puerto Rico to be without power for as many as 328 days after Maria. These impacts are still being felt years later. As the eye of the storm, we witness it all. And I think, her words, if you looked at this piece, you probably wouldn't get all of that, right? You may not, but, oh, that's lovely, thank you. But certainly from the text, you get a lot of additional meaning. Okay, so with my remaining time, I wanted to give you a bit of a gallery tour, and that is what I will do for the next few minutes. So this piece is by an artist named Ian Van Coller. Ian, as a kid, was inspired by botanical art and naturalist art, which is oftentimes drawings with annotation, and he adapted that form to photography. So you can see here that he actually partnered with this scientist, Dr. Avila, who is holding an Antarctic ice core. And you can see I blew up a small section of it that Dr. Avila herself actually annotated this photograph, and Ian kind of directed the overall project and took the image itself. This is a really great example of what it looks like for artists and scientists to actually collaborate together. And so it's really exciting to see this piece and to think about other potential opportunities. This is an example of when data is actually integrated directly into art, and I have 2 pieces here to show you to that end. The first one is by an artist named Jillian Pelto, and This piece reflects Maine, which is, I think, where she's based. And in addition to showing the landscape in this diptych, you might notice that she's also showing, does this have a laser? No, well, maybe it does, but anyway, she's showing 3 lines of data here. The bottom one is the most obvious, and that depicts sea level rise, I think local to her region in Maine. The next one up is that yellow line there at the top of the hillside, and that's talking about the acreage of protected land where she lives. And then the final one up in the trees there, that light seafoam color, is talking about public opinion data around environmental protection. So again, really nice example of data being integrated directly into a landscape. The piece on the right is by an artist based in San Francisco named Lorraine Woodruff Long. Lorraine took air quality data from the 2020 wildfire season and made it into a gorgeous textile quilt, which is absolutely fantastic. The purple color indicates, worse air quality. The quilt itself is probably this big. It's really just gorgeous to see up close in person. Okay, this is one of my personal pieces because I also love to paint the landscape. And for me, landscape painting is a really meditative way to connect with the landscape itself. And this is a work by artist Tammy Phelps. Tammy used cold wax and oil to depict the Alaskan landscape. And she's talking about the melt of the permafrost and the release of methane gas. For me, I think there's a bit of sadness that comes through in this landscape. And I think there's also a real love for place that you get from this. And in general, I think that came through in a lot of the artworks that we received, a real love for place. Okay, this is another piece that I absolutely love. It's by an artist named Laura Tanner. Laura is documenting all of the different factors that influenced the cuisine in the American Southeast. And she's thinking about this from a number of perspectives. She's talking about the impact, the influence of migration and demographic change. She's also talking about the influences of environmental change and, of course, climate change. You see the coast here in the foreground. I love this piece for its technical qualities, but I also love it because of all of the different disciplines that she brings to bear in a single artwork. And that is what we do in the National Climate Assessment, is bring together a very wide range of disciplines into one kind of collective whole. Okay, this is my personal favorite youth piece by an artist named Maggie, who's based in Cleveland, Ohio. She used acrylic paint and gel pad prints to depict the skyline of Cleveland and her interpretation of what is happening with climate change there. I can't claim to fully know what Maggie was thinking here because we have UFOs and Godzilla and flying cows, and there's just a lot of chaos generally, and I think that's probably the most relatable piece of it. But what I really love about this piece is the imagination and interpretation that she brings to her world, and that inspires me. Her ability to think and see the world in this way is really, for me, very inspiring. Okay, so with that, I will wrap up. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you all about this. It's really been a pleasure. And again, here's the link to the Art by Climate Gallery. Please check it out. We've taken this gallery on a roadshow. I'm delighted to bring it to Asheville. We've had events in San Francisco. We're going to have one in New York City. We're really excited to bring this to people for whom it will be meaningful and impactful. So if you have ideas, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I think with that, I will close. Thank you.
You still on? Yeah. Thank you very much, Allyza. That was amazing. So we'll take about a 10-minute break, 7:22 or so. Try to gather in your seats. Allison and Allyza will both be on our panel, along with our lead scientist at the TSU, Ken Kunkel, and Laura Lengnick, who's does a lot of stuff in agriculture and sustainability, really fascinating. And Deke Arndt will lead that discussion. Have questions ready. We'll bring the mic around. If you want to write them down on the notepad, please feel free to do that. And we'll rejoin in about 10 minutes. Thanks. few introductions, questions. Awesome. Thank you, Lennon. And then we'll kick it to the audience and just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I'll bring the mic to you. Laura's watching the chat on Zoom, and Laura will give me a yell if you want to read out a question from Zoom. So take it away, Deke.
Hey, can you hear me? All right, great, fantastic. I'm gonna scoot forward just a little bit so I can see everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Deke Arndt. I'm from the NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, downtown Asheville. Tom mentioned that Ollie is kind of designed for folks to learn during the second half of their life, and NCEI is where a lot of weather and climate data goes to live the second half of its life. So active retirement for the data that goes into the archives and then out the services of NCEI. We're about 200 nerds downtown, including the 15 that Tom mentioned in the TSU. So it's good to be here. So we have a great panel, honestly, for people I respect and admire. It's thrilling to just be sharing space with them, and I get a chance to facilitate this discussion. We're going to get to some Q&A from everyone in the audience, but I would start, and Allison and Allyza, I'll come back with a what makes you tick question. But starting with you, Laura, can you introduce yourself, what you do, and what makes you tick on the climate space?
Yeah, so I'm Laura Lengnick, and I am trained as a soil scientist. For the last 14 years or so, I had a very, very lucky invitation to join doing some technical work on the 3rd National Climate Assessment. And that honestly opened a whole new door in my career. And since then, I've been working on agricultural adaptation to climate change, both on farms, in farming, and also in the food system. And since that first work in the NCA, I went out and did what has turned into a decade of research, talking with farmers around the country about how weather is changing and how they are adapting to those changes and what is working for them. And most recently, policy work that I was involved in as I led the agriculture committee on the North Carolina, or the adaptation action plan for agriculture in North Carolina as part of the North Carolina Climate Risk and Resilience Plan. And what makes me tick? I think what makes me tick is that as big and scary and messy as this climate challenge is, everything that I know from the last 14 years is that we are up to this challenge, and that the solutions that I see are all related to working in community with other people. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Laura, thank you. Dr. Ken Kunkel, can you please introduce yourself and what makes you tick?
Yeah, thanks, Deke. Yeah, I'm the lead scientist for NOAA's Technical Support Unit here, and I've served in that role essentially since the Technical Support Unit was established here back in 2010. So I've been here now approaching 14 years working in this role. So I've been involved in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th National Climate Assessments. I'm going to tip off my age here a little bit. So I have been doing my degrees, my PhD is in meteorology, and I've been emphasizing climate for a long time, but including graduate school and my various positions I've held since then, I've been involved in essentially the field of atmospheric science for 52 years. So it's really been a love of mine. What makes me tick or whatever, I would say that I grew up in a farm in southern Illinois, and we did not have the good soil in our farm that you have in central and northern Illinois. So we were very drought prone, and we had droughts, and it directly affected our family's income. And that was the trigger for me getting interested in the field that I eventually got into. And essentially, it still drives me. I mean, I'm kind of really, I'm a farm boy at heart.
So Allyza and Allison, Allyza, I'll start with you, but the question for both of you. So we got a glimpse into what amazing professionals you are, but we didn't get to hear a whole lot about you. So what kind of got you into this game, and what led you to where you are? At least I'll tip it to you first.
I remember being an undergrad. Well, I've always loved nature and the outdoors. And so going into college, I knew I wanted to do something related. And I remember being in a class about the physical climate system, mainly focused on atmosphere and oceans. But at the end of the class, the professor showed a chart that showed different kinds of renewable energy costs, effects to, I don't know if it was jobs or number of people served. Anyway, it really showed the overlap in a big way between human systems and natural systems. And I thought to myself, that is fascinating and endlessly complicated and extremely important. And I think that in addition to loving the outdoors, I also really do love people. And I think that working on the climate change issue helped me bring both of those things together. So yeah, I think that's kind of what brought me to this space, and I've been doing basically the same thing in different permutations ever since then.
Thank you, thank you. Allison, same question.
Well, I'm from Indiana, not too far from you. And I grew up never having seen the ocean, and I really wanted to see the ocean. So I decided to major in oceanography, even though I went to Michigan State. But it worked. I got to see the ocean. I did my graduate work out in California, and I pulled up sediment cores from the bottom of the ocean and reconstructed past climate change from those sediment cores. So that's how I got really, really involved in climate change work. But I found that what I really love to do is kind of, again, where there's overlap between science and policy and communication. And I feel like that's when I really shine, when I can be doing a little bit of the nerdy science, but also in a way that's really applicable to policy and making a change and making that science used in our decisions. And then I really love communicating about climate change too. And I think the National Climate Assessment, of course, is a really great opportunity to do all three of those things.
So I've got a million questions, but I'm going to hold on to those. It's really good to get to know the personal you. I'm going to throw it. I know we already have a couple of questions on Zoom. Let's throw it to the floor, or maybe Zoom first. Laura, are you?
You want to do?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the very first question is a very sciencey one. Assuming that we are able to someday stabilize atmospheric CO2 levels, will warming immediately stabilize too, or might there be a lag period of continued worsening climate change?
Will be some lag period. And depending on how you measure what's, an important lag, we're probably talking, the major adjustments should take place in a couple decades, I think, something like that. I mean, if you do shut off completely the increases, that it will largely stabilize maybe in a couple decades. Now, to fully equilibrate, it'll take many more decades, but most of that change will occur in 2 or 3 decades. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just want to, this assessment talks about kind of the difference between warming and then impacts. So even if we get to net zero emissions and the warming stops fairly shortly after that, there are some climate impacts like sea level rise and some of the impacts to ice sheets that could happen further in the future. Yeah.
If I can,
Yeah.
and of course, that doesn't mean we go back to, 1950 conditions or whatever. We're still locked into whatever that time period is. So she talks about sea level rise, the increase in extreme events, extreme heat, extreme precipitation, that'll be baked in, essentially forever, or not forever, but into what we have to deal with as a society.
Can I jump in with a little trepidation? Because I don't have the scientific credentials of these folks in climate, and so that is why we not only need to think about mitigation, but also adaptation. And that's where landscapes come in, because there's so many things we can do in landscapes to protect from wind, for example, to provide shade and so on.
Fantastic question from someone who should be facilitating this. That was awesome. Laura, we have one more, I think, on Zoom. Is that right? Or we have Owen on the floor. Yeah.
How about now?
My question is for Deke. I tried using the climate data from your center there. First, I did it with the coaching of an expert user, and then I tried doing it on my own, and I couldn't do it. So I wondered if NOAA was at all interested in making it more accessible to the average person.
The short answer is yes. We are, and not to make this about us, we are in the throes of a giant migration to the cloud. And so we're learning to walk and chew gum, but we see a couple years in the future, much more accessibility. The FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. Absolutely, the demand for the data is going way up, and we are trying to meet that rise in the demand. Thank you.
So I think we'll go to Zoom real quick, and then we'll go to the gentleman over here.
So this is a two-part question for any presenter, but I'm sure you'll all have very different thoughts on this. First part is, what finding in NCA5 excited you the most in a positive way and why? And the second part is, what finding gave you the most, oh no, kick in the gut, fear or anxiety, and why?
Okay. This is not necessarily the most hopeful thing in the report, but it was something I learned from the report, and I'm really proud of, which is that this is the first assessment where we have talked about the disproportionate impacts of climate change on the LGBTQ community. And it was, you know, not that it's brand new science necessarily, but it's just something that I didn't know much about myself. And so I really appreciated learning from those experts, authors, about some of those impacts and how the different, you know, intersectionality of who we are can affect how people are experiencing climate change. I already gave you my oh no statement, which was the frequency of extreme events. So I'll let Allyza maybe go to,
Yeah. I think the extreme events one was probably my oh no as well, because that is something that people will feel very, very tangibly, and it's already happening. So that was my oh no. I think for my hopeful or courage, as Allison likes to say, piece, I think I'd point to, so each chapter is divided into key messages, which is like the high level takeaways the authors thought were most important for people to take from the report. The third key message of the Tribes and Indigenous Peoples chapter talks about all of the different ways that we can learn from Indigenous people about what it looks like to live in a changing world, what it looks like to be better stewards, and to and all of the ways that Indigenous people are already leading on this topic. And I think that, you know, they listed things from everything from, you know, forest management to the arts and youth engagement. And I think that that was really powerful. And there was a lot in there that was new from the past assessment. Not to say that the activities are necessarily new, but I think that the increase in activities and our recognition of them is growing. And so I thought that was really an important thing to elevate.
First of all, I have to say ditto to what you two have said. But for me, I think the most impactful, there were two things really, or that excited me about this assessment. And one was just in general, every chapter that I read was that I just had kept having this feeling that this is such honest communication. And then the other word, or the other phrase that came to my mind very often was the speaking truth to power. And I just applaud the assessment for that. And I actually, maybe we can ask this later, but I really was reading it thinking, how did you do this? How did this get past, you know, all the review that goes on? But anyway, so the speaking truth to power aspect of it around equity issues, climate justice, just transformation, wow, just really moved me. And then the other one, which is a little more kind of dorky, I guess, but it's really important at the same time is that in the agriculture chapter, in the summary, so that's the kind of high level stuff that if anybody's going to read just anything, it's going to be that part. The word agroecology appeared in a federal climate change document. That's why I'm saying it's a little bit geeky, dorky. It's like, maybe that doesn't mean anything to you, but if you know anything about agriculture and food systems, wow. And I honestly don't have a downside, but maybe I was just there was so much excitement around the language and the things that I mentioned that I'll have to maybe get into it a little more to find a downside.
Hey, real quick, I think the positive one would be just, and Allison brought it up in her talk, that in many ways we're moving in the right direction. Maybe not nearly as fast as we want to, but hey, we had been not moving in the right direction at all for a long time. So, and the downside is really from all three assessments that I've been part of, is that it's regarding sea level rise, and we can't avoid it. And as Allison said, when you look at the effects, I say a few decades to go, but that one's going to keep going. We start the melt process in these ice sheets, and it's really hard to stop it and turn it around. And there's nothing you can do, almost nothing you can do in coastal areas to stop it. You know, and we don't seem to be as a society willing to take make the decision not to build in these vulnerable areas. And we're going to pay the price big time down the road.
Thank you. I think we had a question.
Yeah, any question over here?
I'd like to preface my question with Obama's DACA program, first of all. Essentially, that program was a contract with our country that these people undertook. They paid for it. They continue to pay for it. And then instantly upon a change of administration, it was taken away. You know, I've read some legal books, biographies of Supreme Court judges. You know, that's contract law. I mean, you can't just, even though he's the nameless one has an ability to use executive action, he can't just overturn a contract that was made with people. So the environmental thing that I wanted to say, I was hoping that sometime we could make a society where if you want to cut down a tree, you would have had to grow that tree like a farmed forest. You know, no more logging of any kind. And it seems like, as far as I know, bamboo and hemp could replace that kind of thing. And I was wondering if you knew if we have enough available farmland, or if that's even a possible solution for using so much lumber, which is not a healthy thing for the environment.
So sustainability and natural resources, anybody, is that close to anyone's strike zone here? So.
Well, they're all looking at me, so I'm thinking, they're thinking, let's let the farmer answer that question. I can't, I hear your question, and I don't have I don't know enough right now to be able to answer it tonight. But what I can say is that there are so many different parts of our society looking at those kinds of issues and figuring out, for example, how to reduce waste in building, and figuring out how to use local materials instead of imported materials, and how to build buildings that maybe we take apart and reuse and design them to do that. So there really are so many examples of people working on this issue that you bring up, and also many others. Speaking specifically to do we have enough farmland? I can't answer that question because I don't have the data at my fingertips to really be able to sit down and think about the amount of wood used, for example, and the amount of acres it would take to support that. But what I can say is that we do know a lot in agriculture, in particular a type of agriculture or agriculture practice called agroforestry, where we can actually integrate trees into farmland, still get all the benefits of whatever that farmland was growing, vegetables or livestock, and also grow trees. And so there's so many solutions out there that roughly fall under this umbrella called agroecology, that there's a lot there for us to begin to think about and use. We don't have to invent it. We don't need any new technology. We just need to change the way we're thinking about how we use farmland.
Thank you. I think we had one or two.
I've got a written question, and then we'll go over here, and you got another one on Zoom. Okay, so we'll do them in that order. This is pretty broad, and Allison may want to talk about what the report does and doesn't say or do in terms of policy, but what policy recommendations or adaptation strategies are proposed by the 5th National Climate Assessment to mitigate impacts and build resilience?
Thanks. Yeah, I did not say this in my introduction, but one feature of these assessments are that they are policy neutral. So we want to inform policy, but we are not advocating for a specific policy. And the report doesn't include specific recommendations. And overall, we even just try to avoid the word should. What we're trying to do with this report is to make sure that people have all the information they need to be making those decisions for themselves. So those are, that's kind of across the report as a whole. The question about adaptation, I'll just give an example of, I mentioned that a lot of our adaptation to date has been incremental in nature. So things like more air conditioning or raising a house up on stilts. And when we're talking about transformative adaptation, we're thinking more about, well, how do we redesign buildings so that we have passive cooling, or how are we redesigning cities and where we are placing those buildings and the transportation systems in those cities to adapt to all of these different impacts and the cascading impacts in a more holistic way. And that's also going to require some changes in governance and behavior and just institutions. So the report talks about sort of the need for some of those more transformative adaptations, but not in a way that says you should do this. It's hopefully in a way that demonstrates examples and case studies where people have done that and pushes for more of that sort of action to meet our goals.
So I've got one right behind me, and then we'll do Zoom, and we'll come up to the front row here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you actually kind of answered a little bit what I was going to ask, is you're preaching to the choir here. What about the rest of the choir? How do you convince the rest of the choir in the United States to change? And not only that, the world. There's a lot of developing countries in the world that are cutting down the rainforest because they need to develop for their population. And we condemn them for doing it. But, we did the same thing when our ancestors came over here to North America, cut down vast swaths of North American forests. It's kind of hard to tell them not to when we did the same thing. So it's really, all these people are not part of the choir. How do we convince them otherwise?
Yeah, and as I said, I'm from Indiana, so I have a lot of not choir around me. I think there's a lot of ways to talk about climate change, and one of the most useful strategies is always to start with what people care about. So if it's agriculture, talk about agriculture. If it's art, talk about art. If it's farming, talk, whatever it is, bring them into the conversation with the thing that they love and care about. And I think this report also does a really good job of talking about some of those more human elements like our culture and heritage and tradition, our recreation and sports, the family traditions, those sort of things, and how climate change is affecting those. So I think that's a really good entry point. In sort of a larger sense, I think one of the things that gives me the most courage about this report is we didn't have to start on page 1 by saying climate change is real. Thank goodness. We started the report with what people are doing about it. So the very first section of the overview is what people are doing about climate change, what mitigation and adaptation actions. And that's a real change from previous assessments where we started with humans emit greenhouse gases and they go up into the atmosphere and they have a radiative forcing and that causes warming. And then there's climate impacts. And then somewhere way down the line are people, and people doing something. I think by flipping that around and starting with the actions that people are taking, I think that demonstrates how the conversation is advancing in this country. And I think by doing that, we are also advancing that conversation. We're past the stage where we're talking about if it's real, we're talking about what to do about it.
Can I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
One thing I noticed, so just to your question of how we start these sometimes difficult conversations. And one thing I noticed in the report as well is many in the chapters that I read, not all of them, not most of them, but in every chapter I read, in some way, there was some statement around the idea of inviting new ways of looking and thinking at things, inviting different groups of people. The one I'm thinking to get together and begin to talk together about mutual benefit and those sorts of issues, equity issues, just transformation. And the one that really struck me was in the ag chapter, and it was a statement around rural and urban peoples will need to begin to understand that they need each other, that cities need the countryside and vice versa, and to begin having that conversation. And as I read it, it felt to me like an invitation to do that. It wasn't a should, it was a statement that we all need each other, which sounds trite, but in truth, when I think about food and farming in this country, city people need rural community and vice versa. And there are actually some great examples of resilient development that speak specifically to a thing called city region food systems. And it's exactly that, creating food systems that are more equitable and share the benefits of farming and food across a larger region.
So this is a great follow-up question to that topic. What is the most actionable thing individuals can do to slow climate change?
Do you want to go? All right.
Most. That's what we- It's like the menu of things.
I mean, I think the most important thing is to keep talking about it and to keep having uncomfortable conversations. So even when you're not talking to the choir, keep having the conversations, keep talking about it. Don't treat it like it's an impolite dinner conversation topic, because it's not. It's something that we are all experiencing and all feel. I really think the art was a beautiful way to bring people into this conversation. It was also just such a, looking at those 800 pieces was really powerful to me to feel how people are experiencing climate change and to get like a little window into their world. And I think it's that empathy that is most needed. And speaking to your, urban and rural needing each other, that kind of empathy of understanding what people are going through, what sort of impacts people are experiencing around the world. We're not going to know what people are experiencing if we're not talking about it. So telling those stories, talking to one another, communicating what climate change means to you, to others, to me, that's the most important thing.
I was going to say, it's possible.
I apologize if this sounds redundant on my part, but I've also been thinking about the ways to convince people that probably by investing more in land restoration, agroforestry practices and everything, not only would we provide food, we would also provide safer ways of housing, medicines, even alternatives to more alternatives of green energy and transportation. Now, how exactly are you going to get the best known examples, already establish the fact that this can work, out to a public who believes that they should invest the money towards other things that may actually be harmful in both the short and long term?
Answer that one too, sorry. I was just talking to someone, I live in Washington DC, and this is someone who works in Washington DC, and they are working on creating a really beautiful park ecosystem. And they are putting in for funding with FEMA because it's for floods. It helps manage floods to have this sort of, yeah. Right. So for money, to get the money from FEMA, they have to describe it as, flood management. But for the people, it's a park. And the people who are putting it into effect care about the green space, the walkability, the mental and physical health elements of this. And then also in there are climate benefits, because that environment is uptaking carbon. And so we talk about in the report a lot about nature-based solutions like this as really win-win kind of solutions, that they are addressing climate change, but they're also addressing a lot of other issues and providing wonderful spaces for people. Oh, wait, do you want to go? Okay.
No.
Go.
That's not critical. Go ahead.
Last year was a record year for heat. Is global warming accelerating in your opinion? And if so, is the 1.5 degree goal still attainable, or has that ship already sailed?
Yeah, I have an answer to that.
Opinion, it's not an opinion.
It sailed a long time ago. There's no hope for one. Well, okay. Well, what's that? What? No. What? That's what's a disclaimer that you always say? This does not represent the views of my employer. Yeah. So something. Yeah, I don't see how we hit 1.5. I mean, we're at, I don't know, 1.1 or 1.2. We're not going to transform the energy system overnight. I mean, that's a huge ship to turn around. I think 2 degrees is out, unless something, I just don't see even hitting 2, frankly. Oh, the acceleration part. I don't think there's been an acceleration, but we've seen, like, there was a supposed pause back in, I don't know, 2005 to 2010 or 12. Was that, I don't remember. Do I have the time frame right there or something like that?
1998 to 2013.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but most of that was in the latter part of that. And part earlier than that was just people cherry picking data and starting from a hot year. But there might have been a little bit of a pause there due to volcanic activity. And I'd have to have a few more years. We've definitely hit some really hot years lately. I'd have to see a few more years before I would say there's an acceleration. But there's no slowdown that I can see. We're just going, and that's part of the reason saying, I don't see how we're going to do 1.5. Somebody tell me how that's going to happen. I don't see it.
Can you talk about overshoot though?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the IPCC 1.5 report and the overshoot concept, like looping it back around?
Looping it back around. Yeah, now you can potentially, that's right.
Yeah.
You might go up to 2 but to do the overshoot, which means coming back down to 1.5, you're going to have to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, pull carbon.
I can help
Have
with
a
that.
net sink. What was that?
I can help with that.
Well, yes, but will they follow your guidance?
I'm going to add on to that, because I think sometimes when you set targets, it can feel like if you don't hit that exact target, we failed, and why are we doing anything? So that's kind of the danger of 1.5. And a few years ago, there was like, oh, we have 12 years left. And it's like, no, the report finds that every increment of warming, every degree, every 10th of a degree brings more severe impacts to the US. And it's important to know that the flip side of that is true as well. So every degree or every increment of degree that we avoid is going to benefit us. It's important. It affects people. So you can't hit a target like that and just throw up your arms in the air because you know, every little step that we can avoid is important for people.
Do you want to say something, Laura? Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm here if y'all want to talk
Yeah.
about drawdown of carbon in landscapes, nature-based solutions.
And I would also point out that the NCA has what we call a focus box, a special feature on blue carbon, which has tremendous ability to draw down carbon out of the atmosphere. So while I'm not an expert, I definitely encourage you to read that if you're interested, because the capacity for kelp to draw down carbon from the atmosphere is multiple times that, I learned, of, you know, a forest, which, I mean, you will know more about this probably than me, but it was just absolutely fascinating to read about. And that gave me hope, though obviously, you know, these systems are also very vulnerable to climate changes. So while we are going to rely on them, they're also threatened. So it's a bit complicated, but there is promise for that.
Okay, back here for a question.
This is a little bit related to kelp. I'm just wondering if there are other technological methodologies that are beyond the ones we know, solar, wind, electric cars, things that have promise that are yet to be fully invested in and built out.
Everything.
Yeah, it is going to take kind of an everything approach. We are going to get a good way with the technologies we have, but we are going to have to be exploring some of those new ones. The mitigation chapter has a long box on a text box on hydrogen. And so thinking about alternative fuels, especially in those sectors where it's really hard to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think Ken also mentioned, you know, more pulling emissions out of the air. And I think we're probably going to be seeing more and more technologies like that coming.
I think we might have had one more question over here. Was that you? Oh, okay, so we're going to go just a minute or two over, and then Deke, you can wrap it up there.
So thank you. This is a quick one, and I've really appreciated all of this. The art especially intrigues me. And I work with a climate communications group nationally. Is that art able to be used publicly or?
Yes, thank you for asking. So the artists retain copyright of their work, which means that in order to use it, you have to get permission from them.
Okay.
That's the short answer. But I am working on figuring out who of those artists kind of is willing to be contacted by folks, you know, like you or others who may be interested in using their work. So if you reach out to me, if there are particular pieces you're interested in, I'm hoping to have answers to that in the next couple of weeks.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Take it away, Deke.
Hey, so I want to thank you for the easiest moderator gig of my entire career. It's fantastic, wonderful people, really cool. Thank you for your energy and enthusiasm. And if I can kind of wrap up so a little bit of personal perspective and what I know people are thinking, you know, we really enjoyed. Thank you to Ollie and the Arboretum and NC State, all these wonderful partners and resources that we have in this part of the state for putting this on, for continuing to integrate our discussion with what we know and what we're learning along the way with climate. So I'm going to try to get through this without crying, but I'm a super big fan of all four of you. I think you all know. Allison, you know, for those of us who kind of think and worry about leadership, your model of leadership is absolutely amazing. And it's not just willpower and vision, it's you leave a wake of goodness behind you. And that is the mark of a wonderful leader. Ken, from one old droughty meteorologist to another, you know, one of the things that we've seen over and over in the last decade is that institutions that harbor truth sometimes are under a little bit of attack in this country. And so Ken's role in the National Climate Assessment is to oversee the technical support unit, which makes sure that those numbers and those facts and those figures have fidelity to the climate system. A super important role in the National Climate Assessment, but also a super important role to harbor truth in all of the environment that we see. I'm so proud to be your colleague. Laura, thank you for reminding us that we're part of an interconnected system, that we're all kind of in it together, that when we push over here, we may feel it over there, especially in the natural world. Thank you for your insights. I'm proud to share my region with you. And Allyza, I'm saving you for last because when when historians of the future write about this era of what we know about climate change, it won't be a science story. It won't be a technical story. It won't be an energy story, and it won't be a policy story. It's an anthropological story. It's about how we relate to each other, what we value, who we value, why we do it, what we admire, worship, value, elevate, and integrating art in the beautiful way that you did into this assessment, into this conversation, helps remind us that that this is an anthropological story, and it's about what we fear, what we know, what we celebrate, and the stories that we tell. So I'm super proud. I know 2 of you live here, but all 4 of you are part of this community, and really thank you for your time tonight. So thank you. All right.